The Price of Betrayal. Sarah Mitchell never thought she'd become a murderer, but sitting in her downtown Boston apartment, scrolling through dozens of Instagram photos on a rainy October evening, something inside her snapped. The pictures showed Tyler, her boyfriend of 3 years, with Jessica from his office, the same Jessica he'd insisted was just a colleague. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, each image another twist of the knife. There they were at the Harbor Walk, at that fancy new restaurant in Beacon Hill, outside a brownstone she didn't recognize. In some photos they were kissing, in others they looked like they were planning their future, the future Tyler had promised to her. 3 weeks ago he'd given her a promise ring, right here in this very apartment. "You're the only one for me," he'd said. Sarah touched the ring on her finger, remembering how she'd cried with joy that night. Now those tears felt like a mockery. She hadn't left her apartment in 3 days. Empty takeout containers from the Chinese place downstairs littered her coffee table. Her phone was filled with concerned messages from her roommate Emma, who was visiting family in Vermont. "Are you okay? You haven't been posting anything lately." Sarah hadn't responded. How could she explain that her perfect life had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces? Working at Mass General Hospital's pathology lab had its advantages. Sarah had access to things most people didn't: chemicals, surgical tools, and most importantly, knowledge. Her father, Dr. James Mitchell, had been chief of surgery there before his retirement. He'd always hoped she'd follow in his footsteps and become a surgeon. Instead, she'd chosen pathology, fascinated by the way death could tell stories about life. Now, that knowledge would serve a different purpose. She texted Tyler, "We need to talk. Dinner at my place tomorrow? I have something important to show you." His response came quickly, "Can't tomorrow?" "Busy with work." Sarah smiled grimly. "It's about the ring you gave me. Please, I need to see you." A pause then. "Okay, 8 p.m.? Perfect." She spent the next day preparing. A trip to the hospital's supply room yielded what she needed: surgical gloves, a fresh scalpel, and a small vial from the locked cabinet that required her special access code. The dinner would be simple: his favorite pasta dish, expensive red wine, and a special ingredient that would ensure he couldn't leave when the time came. Tyler arrived exactly at 8, looking nervous but trying to hide it. He'd brought flowers, lilies, her favorite. The gesture made her hate him even more. "You look beautiful," he said, taking in her black dress and carefully applied makeup. "Thank you." She accepted the flowers with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I thought we could have a nice dinner before we talk." The apartment was perfect. Candles lit, soft jazz playing, wine already breathing on the counter. She'd even used the expensive tablecloth her mother had given her for Christmas. "Smells amazing," Tyler said, settling into his usual chair at her small dining table. "You made carbonara." "Your favorite." Sarah poured the wine. "A toast to honesty." Something flickered in Tyler's eyes, but he raised his glass. "To honesty." They ate in relative silence, the kind that falls between people who once knew each other intimately but have become strangers. Sarah watched him drink the wine, counting the minutes in her head. When he started to look drowsy, she pulled out her phone. "So, about what I wanted to show you?" She turned the screen toward him. The first photo was of him kissing Jessica outside the restaurant. His face went pale. "Sarah, I can explain—" "Shh!" She held up a finger. "Save your strength. You'll need it." He tried to stand, but stumbled. "What? What did you do?" "It's fascinating, really," Sarah said, opening her father's old medical bag. "The human body is such a complex machine. So many vital parts working together." She pulled on surgical gloves with practiced efficiency. "Did you know that the average person has around 4,000 tendons? Each one vital for movement. Each one so delicate. Tyler tried to speak, but his words came out slurred. The music from Sarah's speakers grew louder, a classical piece she'd chosen specifically for this moment. You know what else is fascinating? She lifted the scalpel, letting it catch the candle light. How easy it is to access restricted substances when you work in pathology. Things that can paralyze, but keep you conscious. Things that prevent blood clotting. Things that ensure you feel everything. Hours later, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, a glass of wine in hand. The cleaning had been meticulous. She knew exactly how to remove blood traces from surfaces. Tyler's car would be found at South Station tomorrow, suggesting he'd taken a train somewhere. His phone, wiped clean, would turn up in a trash can in New York City next week, thanks to a homeless man she'd paid $200. She'd already submitted her resignation letter to Mass General, citing a job offer from a prestigious lab in Seattle. The apartment was mostly packed. In 3 days, she'd be gone, leaving behind only rumors and questions. That night, before bed, she posted on Instagram for the first time in days a picture of the Boston skyline with the caption, "Time for a fresh start. New beginnings." Jessica from Tyler's office liked the post almost immediately. Sarah smiled, turned off her phone, and went to sleep. Years later, when the Boston Globe ran a story about unsolved disappearances in the city, Tyler's case warranted only a small paragraph. No one ever connected him to the other missing persons cases in Seattle, Chicago, and finally Los Angeles. All men, all last seen with a dark-haired woman whose name was never quite remembered correctly. But in certain online forums, a legend began to grow. Stories of a woman who punished unfaithful lovers in ways that left no traces, no bodies, and no closure. Just empty apartments, confused families, and the lingering question of how someone could simply vanish without a trace. Sarah, now living under another name in a sunny California beach town, occasionally read these stories late at night. They made her smile. After all, the best legends always contained a grain of truth.